So first, we're just going to start off, the number one thing, I feel like I need to stand here. I'm kind of a walker, so sorry if I get too far off. If I start to wander off to the side, somebody reel me back in. But the big one we want to start off is inventorying all your feeds. That's kind of one of the first strategies we need for dealing with higher feed costs. Basically, we need to know what we're starting with to know what we're actually going to have to purchase, if at all, for the season, the feeding season to come here in the wintertime. I mean, I'm looking out here and you guys, there's green, we can see green grass and everything here today. In Bozeman, where the university's at, we probably got a foot of snow on the ground. In Miles City, we probably got close to a foot or more on the ground. It's been really cold the week before Christmas. I had a friend text me and it was minus 72 with the wind chill at his place in Malta, Montana. And I don't really know what to tell you, except I'm really sorry and good luck to you and your cattle, and he raises sheep as well. So but one thing we're going to talk about is how do you even feed cattle or livestock in general during that time frame of when those cold temperatures hit. But the first one we want to inventory right is our pasture. What do we have available out there that they can still go out and graze? Because they'll dig down through snow for the most part. Once it kind of forms that crust and it really starts to get harder for them to dig through, they're going to require a lot more feed that we're going to harvest or that we're having to purchase in. What kind of hay do you have? New as well as old stands, old stock that you have left. Big one, the last few years, 2021 was a record-setting drought in Montana, as I'm sure you guys felt that as well. I know quite a few of our guys were calling over here trying to get non-contracted dairy hay, just something to get into the state. But we fed a lot of 3, 4, 5-year-old hay the last couple of years because we had to. We had no other options. And our whole kind of theory and our management scheme for those couple years was, if you can get it, we will find you a way to feed it. We don't care what we got to do for you. We will find you a way to feed that hay. Do you have any grains available? And that's not only just purchase grains and things like that, wheat, barley, corn, but also what else is left in the field? Were you even able to harvest some of those grains? We were not. We had a lot of guys plant barley and wheat those couple of years of the drought, and it grew really good till about 5-6 inches tall, and then that was it. That was as tall as it got. So we had a lot of guys turning cattle out into that in hopes to try and get some of that energy from the grain if it did have a seed head, but also using that as a forage base as well. So we found some different management schemes that we could use to get that grain portion fed. But what other forages do you have? Do you have silage? A lot of purchased silage and trucked down the road the last few years, which honestly probably not the most cost effective because you're trucking a lot of water down the road. But if that's what you could do, that's what you did. Straw and some small grain hay we'll get into here in just a little bit. But what other additional supplements? And I don't care what supplement you use, cake, lick tubs, whatever. We'll find some effective ways to use that. But are there other options available? Montana, at least as far as I know, is still the number one. We have the most breweries per capita in the United States. We're number one in something. So, but we had a lot of producers. You can get those spent brewery grains for free a lot of places, because they just don't have a place to go for them, or they're just hauling them to the dump. So why not use those things? Driving over from Boise or Homedale yesterday, a lot of sugar beet trucks on the road, right? So if you're within a sugar beet plant area, using some of those, the tops and things that the plants cannot use, or that the producers are leaving in the field, those are all good options for livestock. They're good energy, they're good protein. So if you can kind of buddy up with a neighbor that maybe be raising some of those crops that have a lot of waste, that's a good idea to think about as well. But also, I know Sawyer's going to talk about hay testing a little bit later. His head popped up. So, but big one, the cheapest and most cost-effective thing you can do is get a forage test. I think the example he uses, $21 for a forage test. So that's pretty cheap when you put it on a per head basis to figure out what kind of feed you have available and what quality it is and how we can effectively use it. But then the next inventory, what are how many cattle do you have out there? When are we going to need to strategically feed those to keep that production going? So, right, we got our mature cows. We don't worry about them too much, right? You know, they're at their prime. I used to think I was always at my prime, but realized I'm getting older and I don't move as fast, and I don't bounce back as well as I used to. But those mature cows, those probably anywhere from 5 to 8 to 9-year-olds, that's the base of your herd. That's the majority of where your cows are at age-wise, because they've proven to be in your management. They can survive, they can produce for what your goals are. So keeping those mature cows happy, but usually they're also the ones that don't require as much feed because they're able to go out and graze for you and still produce that calf. Then we get into our young cows. Those are our 2, 3, 4-year-olds. You know, we're still trying to get them to that 5-year-old time frame where they're going to start making money for us. We need to get them to 5 to reach maturity. They'll be at their biggest at that point. They'll have their heaviest calf. They'll be milking the most. But those are your, you know, the genetics coming up that we are probably going to have to put a little bit of extra labor into. Old cows, right? Those over 10-year-olds. Now, I'm not saying we need to get rid of them or anything. I know producers that have 14, 15-year-old cows because they still produce a calf every year. The calf weans well every year. They stay healthy. You know, they're still mobile out on the range. There's no reason to get rid of those cows because they're making you money at that point. They've overcompensated for their worth at that point. It's like that 40-year-old pickup, you know, that it still goes down the road every day for you and feeds and everything. And you don't have to worry about putting a new engine or a new transmission in it like some of our newer vehicles do. Heifers, whether it's your yearlings and you're just trying to get them to that first breeding season, or those first calf heifers, you know, they're your highest priority, right? That's the newest genetics you're going to have in your herd, and focusing on making sure they produce for you. And then I always throw bulls on here because they're kind of out. Once the breeding season's done, we just kind of throw them off to the side. You know, they don't really get good pasture. They might get some supplement. They might not. They're just kind of there for the rest of the year. So is it time to think about, you know, where are my genetics moving on into the future? Do I have too many bulls, and should I start kicking out some of that bull battery and maybe considering some other options like AI? Do I need to even have that many bulls available? But the big one is, when do we need to feed all these animals? So the biggest one, when are their requirements are the highest? And when, honestly, are they lowest, and maybe they're thin in that body condition and we need to bring them up back to a better body condition? What kind of environment are we dealing with, right? It's almost 40 degrees out here. It rained all the way over yesterday, you know, and but also, what's our range environment look like? Are they out? Have we brought them in closer for calving season? Do you guys calve in March too? This is the interactive portion, everybody. March-ish, April, yeah. So what kind of weather are we dealing with in that time frame when the requirements are going to be at their peak? Where are they located? Whether they are still out on the range. Last couple of years, we had a lot of guys move their mature cows into the feedlot because that was cheaper and they did not have the feed to use. Plus, then you can potentially limit feed those cows and keep them going, and they aren't going to bust through fences because they aren't full, right? They're still meeting all their requirements, but that's one of the biggest things we need for cows, is to keep them full and keep them happy, whether that's with straw or some sort of low quality forage, because once they're not full, they're going to start pushing fences on you, trying to find more feed to eat. All right, cost. Number one, what is it going to cost me to keep those cows going? So these are just a few management things to think about. We're going to talk through a few of them, but not all of them. I don't have 5 hours to talk to you guys, even though sometimes I can ramble on for that long. But first one, early weaning. One of the easiest things we can do if we don't have enough feed available or our pastures are starting to decline very rapidly. It's always nice to keep in the back burner there, in the back of your mind, that you can do every year. You don't have to do it just on those drought years or when high feed prices are going on. We got guys that I know, one producer, he does it year in and year out, but he also has a dry lot of his own that he can put those calves into, because, right, who wants to chase around, 250-pound calves through fences every day because they can crawl through? That's always fun. So that's always an option available. Yes, you'll have to put in some higher price, probably higher quality feeds into those calves, but you get the cows off, they get the calves off those cows earlier, requirements go down, which means she's the ones that are going to eat the most for you. They are going to eat less because those requirements are declining. Potentially shorten the breeding season. You know, maybe you do AI and then you throw some cleanup bulls in for 30, 45 days. You know, if you have a longer breeding season, you know, I've talked to a few producers that don't ever pull their bulls, and you scratch your head and you go, well, that might be the best option for you, is just pull those bulls after 90 days and cut them off at, you know, cut a breeding season off at 45, 60 days. Plus then it shortens your calving season up, but also if you have enough labor to do it, that's also an option as well, because that's right. Who likes to go for 90 days on a calving season? And because you always got the stragglers, there's like those 5 head that you're like, forget it. You're going out with everybody else. We'll catch your calf later. But also bulls, like I said, considering a shorter breeding season, maybe you don't need quite as many bulls available for that breeding season. We're going to walk through some culling and destocking options here at the last few slides, but then marketing and financing those animals in those certain niche markets if available, or even just a regular market. We'll talk about some cull cow prices at the end as well. But where can you go with those calves? You know, video markets. You know, do you speak to a certain buyer every year because he keeps coming back to you? That is the best thing you can find, is a guaranteed buyer every year, because they like your calves. They do well in the feedlot. Maybe they go on for some replacements and the producers like them. That's your guarantee every year, is to find that good buyer. But also having those trigger dates on a lot of these decisions that need to be made, right? We're a little bit late in the season for early weaning, but it's something to think about for this coming fall if they're projecting a drought, or you know, who knows anymore what economics is going to do and everything, and fuel prices and stuff. But perhaps maybe they're forecasting that feed prices are going to come down, so maybe you can afford to keep some of those calves a little bit longer. But if not, you know, maybe that's an option you can bring in, because I know in early 2020, they projected us to be in a drought, probably January, February. They're saying, nope, we're not going to have average moisture. Didn't make decisions right away. Well, we had some rain, not great. We get into 2021 and they're still saying, nope, we are not getting any moisture, which I kind of want to be a weather person sometime. I want to get the weather right 50% of the time and keep my job. So no offense if there's any weather people in the room, sorry. But, you know, it's making those decisions early, having a plan. It doesn't have to be a formal plan written out, but just having a plan available. So, you know, when you're making these decisions that, you know, hey, I need to get a hold of neighbor Joe over here because he's got some corn stalk residue that I might be able to turn my cows in onto, and that'll help him. He'll get some natural fertilizer out there, but it's also going to help me because I'm not going to have them out on the range that maybe my range is deteriorating. So making those connections with your neighbors, or even just some different breweries or things like that in town, can really help you make some decisions on management. So we're going to kind of walk into herd nutrition and intake here, but just throwing this up here, this is your 1,300 pound cow nutrient requirements in mid-late gestation as well as lactation. This is out of Oklahoma State, but I know University of Idaho also has a really great beef handbook. I like Oklahoma State just because it puts everything on a pounds basis for us. It makes it a little bit easier to do some of the math, because we are going to get into some high school algebra, everybody. You never thought you would use it ever again. This is your one time you can use it. So if we look at that 1,300 pound cow, right, mid-gestation for lowest requirements, best opportunity we have to put weight and body condition back on her. Usually, you know, she's right after weaning, she's kicked that calf off, we've kicked the calf off, she doesn't have to lactate, that fetal development is very minimal at that point, and it's very small. So we can have that opportunity to add some body condition back on. Might be a time, if you have some thin cows, to use some of those higher priced feeds or those higher quality feeds to add that body weight on. Late gestation, we're getting into some of the higher requirements for last 60 to 90 days prior to calving. That fetus is developing exponentially, right? We're going from probably a 30-pound basketball size to that 90-pound calf, plus the placenta, the fluids, everything like that. She needs those extra nutrients to keep that calf growing. but not the best time to add body weight and body condition on it. We can if we have those high quality feeds available, but early lactation, 60 to 90 days post calving, we almost can't feed her enough to add body condition as well as provide enough feed for the lactation requirement she's got. So trying to time some of the strategic feedings of those high priced, high quality feeds can really help us mitigate some of our input costs. So here we go, just looking at different cow sizes in late gestation. So 1,100 pound cows. Now I'm going to ask this question, not for you people in the virtual area, but who has 1,100 pound cows? Yep, and that's the average cow size right now is 1,350 pounds in the United States. Usually if somebody comes to me and asks like, oh, can you develop a ration? My cows weigh 1,100 pounds. And you kind of go, do they? And I'm not really one to judge because I'm a horrible judge at looking at a cow and being like, yeah, there's like, she's 1,250 pounds. I'm not good at that. Just like I'll look at this group and be like, yeah, there's 20 people here and there's probably 50. I don't know. So keeping in mind where those requirements are can really help you decide what kind of genetics you want to move to, right? Because everybody for so long has pushed for those bigger, framier cows because we get those big weaned calves off of them. It makes us some extra money, but they're usually going to eat some more. But some research we've done has actually shown on a per pound body weight basis, big cows and little cows actually eat fairly similar on that basis. Those 1,100 pound cows, some of them, depending on how deep and how much rumen capacity they have, they can eat just as much as that 1,400 pound cow. So just bear that in mind. Size doesn't always necessarily mean they're going to eat less or more for you. But as we can see here, as you increase size, just for the maintenance requirement, protein and energy demands go up as we increase that body size. So we're going to move into a few different options of maybe some cheaper alternatives or just some alternative feeds that you might be able to use in your operation. So first one, right, we can use in the fall and the winter some of our hay fields to graze on. They're high quality, especially if we got some of those thinner cows we can use to add some extra body condition on too. Unless you really need maybe that third cutting, if you get to that third cutting, you guys, I think, get a little bit more moisture than us. In Miles City, we're at about 13 inches a year for rainfall or precipitation. And so if we get to a third cutting, usually we're so excited because we get to have a third cutting. We take it anyway. But if you don't need that extra cutting, maybe leave it there, especially if you got an opportunity to turn some cows in on graze on it, because usually it's a really high quality feed. You can maybe boost some body condition in that mid gestation range or save it for that late gestation when those requirements start to go up. There's other things like I mentioned previously, like the corn residue. We're actually just starting to use more of that, or even baling the corn stalks and bringing them in. Midwest uses it all the time as a management opportunity. Last year and the year before, in a few of our counties, we had over 50% of our cattle leave the state and go to Nebraska to graze corn stalks because that was what they had available. And those cows never came back. We never got moisture. We didn't get any snow. And so they sold them straight off the field in Nebraska as pregnant cows. So unfortunately, a lot of guys sold out the last few years. And as of, I think when I spoke to the agent up in Malta here, they still had not, they got really cold, but they've never received any snow from the last snowfall we received. So unfortunately, unless more moisture starts to move in here this spring, we're probably going to see even more cattle from those areas move out of the state. Cover crops also is an opportunity, but you got to kind of have some forethought in that. When are you going to plant them? What are you going to plant? Because there's several different seed mixes out there that you can plant. Usually from what our research has shown, anywhere between about 8 to 10 species is about as much as you want to get as complicated, because otherwise they start to outcompete each other. But one of the things to think about, what do cover crops require? Water, right? And so if we don't have any water, we had a lot of guys try cover crops the last few years thinking, hey, we'll plant it, maybe we'll get lucky, and it didn't work too well. Some of them, they got some nice strategic rains and it did turn out okay, not the best. But we also have to start thinking about different things like nitrates and sulfates with some of our cover crop species. Now, alfalfa, you guys are a big dairy state. One thing to keep in mind, beef cows are not dairy cows. They do not need your supreme premium and good quality hay. They barely even need fair and utility alfalfa hay. Most of our hay for alfalfa falls in the fair and utility for our beef cows, and that's still over and above their requirements. So we can start thinking about how can we mix that with a lower quality forage, a less expensive forage, and still meet our beef cow requirements. We'll get into the requirements a little bit more here and how to calculate all of that out. But it is something to keep in mind. Do you have some dairy producers, maybe their hay didn't turn out as well and maybe yours did, and you can maybe do some swapping, some trading, and how to best use some of that alfalfa hay. Small grain hay, we use this a lot. Barley and wheat hay, most of our what we call barley and wheat hay the last couple of years has been more barley and wheat straw, just because of the drought. But if you can harvest it anywhere between heading and soft dough, it's usually a very good quality hay available. Plus there's usually a little bit of a grain portion in there to add that energy in. Big one though, nitrates. You guys dealt a lot with nitrates the last few years? No? Okay. So we have, even into this year, we've had crops turn up with high nitrates that we never even would have considered, like alfalfa. It is not normally considered a nitrate accumulator or to have those concentrations. And unfortunately, we've lost some cows on it. But it is just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind if that is an option. But like I said, if you can get it, we will find a way to help you feed it.
What levels?
So I don't have that in here, but so it depends on actually who you look to. We're fairly conservative in Montana on our recommendations for nitrate levels. And so general recommendation for what I say is usually less than 5,000 parts per million nitrate. One thing to keep in mind if you do get an analysis back is to look at the lab and how they report nitrates, because it can either come as nitrate parts per million or nitrate nitrogen. So nitrate nitrogen, I'd have to look at our recommendations, but it reduce the level, or you multiply that by 4.43 to get your nitrate part per million. But we've run into a lot of our crops because of the weeds, kochia, things like that are very high nitrate accumulators. Oats is your #1 nitrate accumulator in a planted crop. I can't remember the company, but they were selling a seed mix and it was oat, barley, and wheat, if I remember right. And it said no nitrates right there on the label, everything. And we had some producers plant it. And when they tested it, it came back over like, I think 15,000 parts per million. So then they're calling the company going, you told me this. And as far as I know, it's still listed on their label as a non-nitrate feed. So unfortunately, it is something to keep in mind. As well as when you're thinking about purchasing hay, is where are you getting it from? Do they have a nutrient analysis on it? And it's to make sure that it's on that lot of hay. If you have any concerns, I would get my own analysis done on it. We had some that came in the last few years where they were provided a nutrient analysis that included nitrates, and it said, okay, it's a little bit risky, but not high risk. We can feed it. Well, they started feeding it, and they lost a bunch of cows. We sent in, we tested every single bale and sent it in. And instead of 4,000 parts per million, it came back at 27,000 parts per million. Nobody seemed to know what happened. It was a risk he took. And our working theory was that it was regrowth that they did not test. They only tested the actual first cutting. So it is something to keep in mind if you are purchasing hay, is where are you getting it from, as well as having somebody look at it, or you go look at it. Because if there's weeds in there, definitely getting it tested, as well as finding a sacrifice area to put that hay on the ground can really help save your pastures as well, and limit that weed encroachment that might be there. Because we pulled in a lot of hay from Missouri, the southeast, south central United States over the last few years, and we've run into some fescue toxicosis problems, which that's a pretty common issue in that area with the endophyte infected fescue. But we don't normally deal with it. So just some things to keep in mind. Like I said, corn residue, corn stalks, is this a possibility? The husk as well as the leaf structure actually are really good protein and energy sources. So it is an option, especially if that is left out in the field or is baled up with the rest of the stalk. Stalk is pretty low quality. It's very fibrous. They don't really like to eat it, but it is a feed source. It's a low quality feed source, but it keeps them full. Because of the low protein of corn itself, we have to consider some protein supplements if we are going to feed those. And one thing to consider is if you do get some snow and if you're out in the field, it lays those stalks over as they harvest it. They'll just have to really start digging through that snow, but they will go through and they will find every kernel of corn in that field. Trust me. Straw. We have fed a lot of straw in the last couple of years, and we have thrown every general rule out the window because we had to. It's low protein, low energy. Our general recommendation is to limit it to about 50% of the diet if possible for those mature cows, and to feed at least a halfway decent quality forage with it, 7-8% protein, just something to keep that straw moving through the digestive system. If we don't, we can have compaction problems. It'll just sit there and ball up because it is just so poor quality. But I know there have been producers in Montana that have 100% fed straw. They threw a little bit of protein out with them and they survived just fine. It's not my general recommendation, but like I said, we've kind of had to try some different things we normally wouldn't try because we could get straw in for cheaper than any of our higher quality forages. And when I say cheaper for straw, we had some straw going between $150 and $200 a ton the last few years. Normally when you can pick it up for less than 100. So we had to do some things. Another option with straw is if you have a liquid feed option, turn them on their end, dump liquid feed onto it. It entices them to eat it, but it also adds the protein and some flavoring in there, gets some energy going. It can help a little bit with the digestibility as well. So now we're going to walk through maybe some intake things to think about. First one, that 1,400-pound cow is going to, on average, eat about 2% of her body weight every day. Plus, it makes math a little bit easier as well when we're talking 2%. So 28 pounds of dry matter is what she would need, is what we're hoping to feed her every day, keep her full, meet all of her requirements. So if we think about 85% dry matter, that's about 33 pounds as fed. So that's what you're going to roll out on the ground for her. So over 100 days, she's going to eat about 3,300 pounds. And if you got 100 cows out there, that's 330,000 pounds of feed in that 100 days, which we think that's probably pretty close to what we're hoping to feed every year, just to get them through the late gestation, early lactation, and hopefully get us to green grass. Right, because our goal a lot of times is to not start feeding until after January 1st, at least in Montana. That's our goal. Some years it happens. This year, not so much. The last couple of years, not so much. This year, because we had a couple snowstorms come in. It was right about Thanksgiving time, and in some of our state, they've been under snow now for what would that be? 6 weeks, 8 weeks, something like that. So thinking if we have 1,300-pound bales out there, that's about 2.5 bales per cow over that 100 cows. So minimum in your inventory stack, you need 250 bales just to keep her full and hopefully get us through that 100 days. So if you don't have that, it's thinking, okay, what do we need to buy? How much do we need to buy to get us to our goal of feeding as well as meeting those requirements, right? Because that is the bare minimum. It doesn't account for waste. It doesn't account for anything else. And it doesn't guarantee that that feed is going to meet those requirements throughout her entire 100 days. Because as we move into that early lactation, those requirements skyrocket. So sometimes we can feed in late gestation, I don't want to say a low quality hay, but a medium quality hay. And then we save our high priced, high quality feed for early lactation in hopes we can get them to green grass. Hopefully not too long afterwards. So just to kind of give you an idea about cow weight, like I said, sometimes those smaller cows, they aren't going to necessarily eat less, but on average, we assume they do, right? But Cows don't read the book. It'd be a lot easier on us all if they did. But that 1,200-pound cow, even you don't think about it too much, but even just a couple, 3 pounds less feed, that's a lot over 100 days. So is that a potential possibility? We're still meeting her requirements. So like I said, see if I can, by 3 months after calving, that's her peak lactation. What's that also coincide with? Where's my front row people?
And grass coming on.
That, and we're open for breeding season, right? So all her requirements are at their highest and we need her to get her there. So those high quality feeds, a lot of times are high price feeds. That's maybe a strategic time to start feeding those. But is body weight the best indicator for what we need to feed? Because like I talked about, some of those littler cows, if they have a really deep body, right? What we look more in our replacement heifers, those deep bodied, big ribbed, those kind of girls, rumen capacity is probably going to be a little bit bigger. So they're not necessarily always going to eat less for you. But a lot of times they can eat that lower quality forage and it can have a lot bigger surface area in there to be those nutrients absorbed and worked around than even some of our bigger animals. How good is she going to graze for you? Can we turn her out there? Is she going out into those hills and she working for you full time? Or is she hanging around because she knows the feed truck's coming here in the next couple of days or the next couple of hours, right? Because everybody knows you drive out there with your feed truck and they're going to come running. Does she work for you management wise? Does a bigger animal or a smaller animal work better for your management style? Your cows have been on your operation long enough. You know what you're looking for, and it's not necessarily what neighbor Joe is looking for either. Keep that in mind. Don't worry about what your neighbor's doing a lot of times. It's keeping what you can do with your management. Because, right, labor is an issue. Doesn't matter where we are. Labor is an issue. So keeping those cows that are easy keepers for you that you don't have to worry about. Can they produce with your management style? Are those calves looking good at weaning time? What kind of pounds of calf weaned are you getting per cow body weight, right? The magic is, well, she needs to wean 50% of her body weight every year. It's a magic kind of out there number. I don't look at it quite as hard. Yes, I want a cow to have a good looking calf, but we all know we've got Bessie out there. She weighs 1,800 pounds. She has a body condition score 8 or 9, and she weans that 350-pound calf every year. But she's Bessie. She comes running to you. Grandkids like her. She's their favorite. Maybe she's your kid's favorite. But is she the best for your operation? If it keeps you happy, maybe. But when high price feeds are available and that's all you can get, as well as drought, and you're trying to help manage your pasture situation, it might be time for Bessie to go down the road. Don't tell your kids or grandkids I told you to do that. I don't want them mad at me. But also just having cows that match your environment, like that's the magic, right? Is, well, you need cows that match your environment. There's not one size fits all. A lot of it has to do with what's available to you and how you're managing and how you have to manage your animals. So once again, just looking at protein and energy requirements for those March calving cows, right? We're in early January here. So we're starting to get that step up to the last 60 to 90 days pre-calving when her requirements are at her highest. So we're needing to think about those higher priced feeds, those higher quality feeds at this time. Breeding season, we hope we're going to have green grass. Everybody knock on wood and, cross our fingers and maybe do a rain dance. But we're looking for things like that. And hopefully we get the green grass to help us meet those requirements of those cows. Probably about the weaning time here, September, October, all the way through about now is when we're thinking about lowest requirements. Do we have thin cows? Do we need to add body condition back to them? Now, I'm not saying that your body condition score 4 cow out there, but she's always a body condition score 4. She produces a good calf. She looks good. That calf's growing well. She produces enough milk and she's still producing. And she's always a 4. She's probably not the one to focus on. It's the one that's a body condition score 5 or 6. All of a sudden something happens. She declines rapidly to a 3 or 4 body condition score. That's the one we probably want to get back up because something happened in there. She just used a lot of her extra body condition for something, whether she was ill or she needed all that body condition to put into the milk. That's the one that we want to focus on, is the ones that are losing the body condition that are normally in an optimum of a 5, which we'll get into body condition score here. So body condition score, if you haven't done it, it's a scale of 1 to 9. If you're a dairy, it's a 1 to 5. You can kind of break it down depending on this, but usually we consider a 4, 5, and 6 kind of your optimum area, and 1 through 3 is where we consider the thin cows. They aren't producing probably very well for you. Milk quality and milk quantity is down. She doesn't have a lot of extra body fat available to help her get her through some of these high stress times like calving season, lactation, and then into breeding season. So those are the ones we kind of want to bring back up. And it's about 100 pounds per body condition score to get her back to where she needs to be as you switch either way. So going from a 1, which most likely she's your downer cow, you know, she ain't going anywhere. That's almost about impossible to get her back up. It might be some time to call her, but your 2s and 3s, this last year, or I should say in 2020, I didn't see a lot of thin cows. They didn't get a lot of feed, but they were still pretty decent out there. By 2021, because they hadn't seen much, I saw a lot of thin cows hitting the sales market the last year. So it is something to think about, and how we're going to have to manage those cows and those higher priced feeds to get her back up to the good body condition. Like I said, 4, 5, 6 is optimum. So I like to see them average a 5 all year round. Usually she's got enough body cover on her, you know, don't have to worry about her too much in the winter time. She's able to lactate. Calf usually is pretty good because body condition is an indicator of what sort of antibodies and things like that are going into the milk during and in colostrum to keep that calf healthy. Better body condition, you're going to have a healthier calf on the ground. Now we get into Bessie here. She's a 7, 8, 9, depending. That can all, yes, she'll rebreed a lot faster for you at a 9 or an 8 or a 7, but it also costs you a lot more money to get her there and to keep her there than a lot of times keeping her at a more moderate body condition. Plus, we've all seen the bulls out there that no offense if you're raising bulls for bull sales, but they look really pretty at bull sale time, but they're probably 400 pounds overweight, and then you're hoping to turn them out and make them walk and graze and keep up with those cows to breed. So that's when we start needing to think about stepping them back. Don't just throw them out there because they're going to melt away for you. And a lot of times structure-wise, they're going to go way down. Yes, they look, like I said, they look really good at the bull sale, but it is something to keep in mind that you start stepping them back as soon as you get them before you turn them out. But also it can negatively affect sperm quality too. If they're too fat, that fat accumulates around the scrotum and sperm quality will decline. But it's also the same with our cows. Yes, they have the possibility of rebreeding, but they have accumulated fat around that uterus and around those uterine horns, and can also help limit pregnancy as well in there too. So carefully stepping them back to a 4, 5, 6 versus just letting the fat melt off of them is better. But like I said, we all got Bessie out there. She's an 8, and probably no matter what you do, she'll always be an 8 because that's just how her body is too. So we're going to move a little bit into environment here. I'm just going to touch on it a little bit. So when we talk about environment, it's one of those kind of ambiguous terms because it's so variable. And honestly, the last time we addressed environment for requirements was back in the 80s. So we don't have a lot of improved knowledge since then. We just kind of make our best guesses, unfortunately. But right now we're considered into heavy winter, which who would know by this lovely weather out here. But 18 degrees Fahrenheit is what we consider the lower critical temperature for our cattle. Now, our cattle in the northern region are a little bit different than cattle in Texas and Florida, where 18 degrees is probably actually the lower critical temperature. 18 degrees up here, that's pretty average for wintertime. You know, we don't think much about it. If they have a time to adapt to that temperature, they get a really good hair coat on them, they're going to do a lot better because they had that adaptation time, and we probably don't worry about increasing their requirements that much, but we can do it. But then we add in the wind, right? Because it's never windy here, and so, a day like today, looking out there, it's a little breezy. It isn't bad. But for the next slide, we'll look at this. I think the average, that the example I use is about 12 degrees. Thanks to John Hall, who I stole his slides. He's probably listening and just shaking his head now. But and then we have to calculate in that wind temperature for wind chill. So we're sitting right about a 5 degrees ish adjusted temperature if 12 degrees is the actual temperature out. So, right, if it's too hot, they don't eat, right? Because I'm like them. We worry more about that on probably the feedlot side as well as our 4-H animals. Once we get towards fair season and it's August and it's 100 degrees out, they don't want to eat. I don't want to eat, but they're probably drinking a lot of water. But once we get into the lower temperatures, you're starting to stimulate that intake. And like I said, the 18 degrees is kind of that lower critical temperature. But if we look here between the 5 and 20 degrees, it's a pretty good spread as we decrease temperature on how much we're actually increasing and stimulating that intake. So the general rule is you increase energy requirements by 1% for every 1 degree below your lower critical temperature. Now, that's where the limitation comes into play for the requirement aspect, because we didn't go anywhere beyond energy requirements. Usually now we just think, okay, once we get below our lower critical temperature, we're going to increase everything by 1%, even though we still only can determine it as energy requirements. So like I said, we have an average daily temperature of 12 degrees, winds at 5 miles an hour, which means our adjusted temperature is about 5 degrees. Lower critical temperature is 18 minus 5, which means it's a 13 degree difference or a 13% increase in that intake that we need to worry about. So that 1,300 pound cow, she needs about 11 pounds of energy every day. So she's currently eating what she needs to meet those requirements at 22 pounds at 50% energy diet. So by increasing by 13%, that's another 1.5 pounds-ish that we need to feed her every day to help keep those requirements going during that cold spell, which in 5 degrees to me is kind of like, it's 5 degrees at this point in time, but we can feed her enough to get her to meet those requirements. Now, we get into the minus 72. No, we're not going to be able to increase her intake by almost 80 pounds or 80% because there's still some limitations in that room. And when it gets to be that cold, I would rather see them laying down somewhere out of the wind and conserving energy than getting up and you forcing them to come out and eat. But this is also a time when we get into these really low temps that we're trying to feed them is to feed them a lower quality feed stuff. It sits in the room and longer, maintains her core body temperature longer. Feeding them closer to dark can also help that as well, because that's our coldest temperatures. It's helping them maintain that rumen function and keep that rumen going all through the night. And then the next morning, maybe a little bit higher quality feed, especially you'll see them out on those nice sunny days. They'll be out sunning themselves. If they can get some sun and be out of the wind, they're going to help maintain that core body temperature a lot better than if we're trying to get them up and out and the wind's blowing 60 miles an hour, there's no sun, and she's out in the open trying to eat. So sometimes, we'll see a depressed intake when we get to be that cold because they'd rather just stay huddled down, and probably you would rather be huddled up inside than trying to go out and feed them with the bales. So just something to keep in mind there. That might be also a time to use some of those lower quality feeds or lower priced feeds and save those higher priced feeds when she's actually up moving around and she's going to be using that extra energy and protein. So just a few tips. High quality feeds when requirements are at their highest, obviously. Low quality feeds during mid-gestation, but also during those really cold temperatures, unless you need to build some body condition back on those cows. And the moderate and high quality feeds during those high requirements as well, but also what's going to be most cost effective for you to feed, right? I can stand up here and tell you all day, well, you can feed this, this, and this, but unless you have it available, it doesn't really mean a whole lot. One thing to keep in mind with those high quality alfalfas, we can mix them with the straw. We can mix them with low quality feeds and still create a really good ration for our beef cows that'll help keep everything going, meet all their requirements, but you're also limiting those high priced feeds and lowering your input costs. Keeping cattle full, like I said, is also a really good idea with those lower quality feeds, just because they're going to start pushing fences if they aren't full. A lot of guys, like I said, moved into a dry lot the last couple of years, and that's also how they kept limiting those high quality feeds, because those cows could not push through continuous fencing. So it was an option. They still met all their requirements. They just didn't ever get really full or fat. So feed cost, right? That's the big one, right? So calculating on a per nutrient basis. So just a couple comparisons here. I know hay prices have been a lot higher than this. This is just the example I had, but $250 a ton hay, about 13% protein, about 55% energy. Or we can buy a cake supplement at $350 a ton at 20% protein and 65% energy, which I was giving Marty a lot of grief yesterday from Performix about why nobody puts energy on their feed tags. It's not a requirement because it's not regulated like protein and all the other nutrients are. So you kind of have to estimate your energy values on those commercial supplements a lot of times, just to kind of do this calculation, unless you send a sample in. But math's pretty simple. You get your pounds of protein and energy for both supplements, 0.129 times 2,000 per ton, because that's how we buy everything. Then divide the price by how many pounds of that nutrient. So with hay, it's about 97 cents per pound of protein. Obviously, if that hay price is higher, the protein will be higher, but it's also going to increase your price. About 23% or 23 cents per pound of energy. Our supplement is 88 cents per pound of protein, 27 cents per pound of energy. Usually this time of year for late gestation, we're worried about our protein needs. So, okay, on a lot of years when that hay is actually a lot cheaper, it's probably the most cost-effective protein and energy supplement we have. Now, as hay prices skyrocket, then it's probably not our most cost-effective, but this is just per pound of nutrient. This doesn't get into how much do we actually have to feed those cows to meet our needs. This is also a really good calculator out of South Dakota State, where it does everything for you. You don't have to hand math it all out. It's a spreadsheet. I saw a few people like writing everything down, taking pictures. Like the presentation's on here. If you want these slides, just let me know. I'd be happy to send them out to you. But it's just a spreadsheet. You download it, you enter in your feed ingredients, the price, and your nutrient analysis. And it's really good. It's just something good to keep on hand for calculating those feed prices a lot faster. But once again, we're going to look at those nutrient requirements. We're going to focus on pre-calving and post-calving. So as we can see, those nutrient requirements, at least on the protein side, almost double from mid-gestation to lactation. So it is something to keep in mind, and maybe a time we're going to have to strategically feed those higher priced feeds. So quick calculations. We aren't getting into the algebra yet, almost. So we're looking at pasture. It's probably about 5% protein right now, 50% energy. So from that pasture itself, that 1,400 pound cow on a dry matter basis, she's going to get about 1.5 pounds of protein and about 14 pounds of energy. Well, pre-calving, okay, we're pretty close on energy. Rule of thumb, if she can eat everything she wants every day at this point in time, she's probably pretty close to meeting the requirements if she stays full and we can get her there. Protein, not so much. We need to help boost that a little bit. Now, post-calving, if she's still out there grazing, she's pretty darn short on both protein and energy, and we're going to have to really think about some supplements. So how much do we need to feed? Here's our algebra. We're going to solve for X. It's pretty simple. We know we need X pounds of that 13% protein hay, and because we need to strategically feed just enough to get to that about 0.7 pounds of protein. 0.7 divided by 0.129, we're solving for X, and gets us about 5.5 pounds of hay per head. Right, and it's really easy for me to say, yep, you need 5.4 pounds of hay, which is about 2/3 of a bale. Can you go out and roll out 2/3 of a bale out there? You guys aren't going to do that. Roll out the bale. They'll use up the rest of it. Or we do the same calculation with that cake available. So we need 3.5 pounds of the cake. Well, if I got a cake feeder, you know, I knew it was about 88 cents per pound of protein. Not too bad. I can figure that out and we can look at that. And that's for late gestation, pre-calving. Oh, well, that's pretty easy. You know, maybe I think the feed tags usually say between 2 and 4 pounds. I'm right there. It might be easier to go feed that cake than it would be to roll out those bales and maybe save those bales for later on. Because in post-calving, right, we have to get her 2 pounds of protein. Well, that's about 16 pounds of hay and about 10.5 pounds of cake. Well, cake might not be quite that easy to feed at that amount, and getting her to eat that much cake a lot of time. Well, you'll always have Bessie out there; she'll eat 10 pounds of cake, but you know. So then, if we say, okay, how much is that going to cost us per head for hay or the cake? Well, hay is going to cost us about 68 cents a head for that 5.5 pounds. For the 3.5 pounds of cake, 62 cents. That's only a 6-cent difference. So, okay, maybe it's not quite that much difference, but 100 head, 100 days, $6,800 for the hay, $6,200 for the cake. That's a $600 difference. Still, maybe not quite that much difference because it's not accounting for labor. It's not accounting for any sort of extra, like if you don't have a cake feeder, are you just 5-gallon bucketing it? I got a friend that does that every day. It's like 12 5-gallon buckets, and she just sits there and throws them out on the ground. That's a lot of extra labor. So just a few things to think about that. But then we do it for post-calving. So now the hay is about $2 per head per day and $1.85 for the cake. But still, 10.5 pounds of cake, that's a lot of cake. But it's almost a $2,000 difference over that 100 days and your 100 head of cows. So that might add up over time. But like I said, doesn't account for any labor costs. How easy is it to feed? Your fuel cost, right? Fuel prices have been astronomical, and the ability to graze. So just a few things to think about when we're calculating some feed costs. So our last few slides here, we're just going to get into a little bit of culling. Because, right, probably nobody likes to hear it, but this is the easiest way to cut down on your feed cost. Just get rid of some cows, which is a lot easier for me to say up here, standing here talking to you, than for you, because you've been finding these genetics that are fitting your management style every year. You know what cows you're going to need. But the big few steps are setting your production goals. Are you meeting your production goals now? Should we be looking at some different areas? Do you sell right at weaning? Do you sell off the cow? Do you background? Are you keeping replacement heifers, bulls, things like that? Critically assessing your herd. That's really hard to do because we all like Bessie. But sometimes we do have to go out and really look at our herd and say, hey, are my cows fitting what I need them to do? And then making that priority list for culling on your production goals. Doesn't matter what class of cattle we're talking about. And then if you have different outlets to sell those cattle to, find those markets to sell them to make the most money back. So first culling goals, right, those are easy ones to think about. Production issues. She's too old. She's got bad feet, bad udder, bad teeth. She's a gummer. She's open. She didn't meet your breeding criteria for your breeding season. And she's Bessie. She's got that 350-pound calf every year, and she weighs 1,800 pounds. Maybe she's really thin. You can't get any body condition back on her. She didn't breed in season. Maybe she's too large. Maybe she's too small for your breeding season. Those are the easy ones. Or you got the calving book out here. If you write her down as that she is not nice, we all know we don't write that in there. We write other words. Get rid of her. No cow is ever worth dying for. Because trust me, if you aren't there to do the labor, who's going to do it for you? So, I mean, usually if she's chasing me, I understand a protective cow, get it. Like if she's protective, that's fine. But if she's eating my lunch when I'm standing in the middle of the pasture throwing mineral out, and she comes from across the field to eat me, that's the cow to get rid of. Then we have like least efficient. that's the vague term, right? Like, what do we mean by efficiency? Is that pounds capped wean per pound per pound of cow body weight? Or is it that cow that can't produce on those pastures out there? You know, is she not meeting those efficiency goals you need her to? Can she not go up and graze? Is she always waiting by the feed truck area? Genetics is also a hard one to determine because you have your young animals coming in, they increase labor, they usually increase your feed costs, but they're the newest genetics. Those are the genetics you want in your herd in the next 5 years to 10 years. Or you maintain your old cows, your mature cows, because they've proven to meet your management goals and meet your system. You know, that's the hard decision to make. I've had some, you know, you take off either end. You keep the main mature herd because they're the ones that aren't costing you money. And then replacement heifers. Which ones are you selecting for? What are you keeping? But not all heifers are destined to be replacements. Some deserve to go into the feedlot, and those are how you should market those. That can help a lot of times than trying to make sure you try and keep everything back to be a breeding heifer. Some of them are just not meant for that. And then I'll put on here bulls, but you know, keep your bare minimum of a bull battery. You don't need to keep wintering through a lot of those older bulls. Get rid of them if you don't need them. Just a real quick here on cull cows. This can be a very large proponent of your income every year, is maintaining those cull cows. Now, obviously, it's it's kind of hard when we're in a drought and we don't have a lot of feed, or we have really high priced feeds to keep them past the first of the year. But I looked at cull cow prices just last week, and they were up over $1.50 per pound. So, you know, that is one thing to keep in mind. They can be a huge component of that income if we can hold them past the first of the year instead of culling them when everybody else does in October, November, beating out that market a little bit. Now, cull cow price has actually been pretty decent the last few months, but you know, on an average year, when we hit October, November, cull cows are down about 55 cents. So it can be a huge component for that income if you can hold them back, but they also require that extra feed if we're trying to add a little bit of weight onto them.
Then they might die.
Well, and they might die. That is true. Keep the cows that can be culled that are still going to make you some money. Maybe cull that cow that you might think she's going to die a little sooner and out in the back 40 somewhere. That's all I had. I'll be glad to take any questions, whether it's online or I can see if I can get this to work here. Or here in the room, I guess.
How do we access that calculator from South Dakota?
If you just Google South Dakota State Nutrient Cow Calculator, it should pop right up for you. Don't everybody jump at once. Did I bore everybody? It's not as bad as yesterday. There was a guy over here that fell asleep like 3 times while I was talking. So
Can I get your thoughts on something? I'm
Yeah.
really curious about this change in cow size, since I'm really thinking about this. And aren't those smaller cows, if you can have a little better chance of getting to rebreed if this in the winter when you're having trouble feeding them?
just so everybody online heard the question. So about the cow size, wouldn't the smaller cows rebreed a little bit better than those big cows? Not necessarily. It all, because everything depends on body condition for that uterine repair after their calving season. So sometimes, yes, those smaller cows can possibly rebreed a little bit better, but a lot more of it has to do with body condition than actual body size. So the better condition, even your larger cows, they probably are going to cost you a little more money because they're increased maintenance requirements. But if they're in good condition and your smaller framed cows are in good condition, there really hasn't been a lot of research showing that those smaller cows are going to rebreed better. They might be a little more mobile, depending on your range environment that you might be in, you know, reaching higher areas than those bigger cows are. But honestly, they don't really, there hasn't been shown a big advantage to those smaller cow size on the rebreeding aspect if they're also in good condition. Yeah.
What body condition score should we be looking at coming into calving?
Question was, what body condition score should we be looking at just coming into calving? Usually I target between a 5 to a 6. I like her a little bit on the fleshier side at calving season. Not overly fleshy. That's kind of one of those double-edged swords there. She can be too fleshy where she'll cause some dystocia problems because of that excess fat. So if we can keep her between a 5 to a 6, she's got enough condition to get her through the stress of calving. She can pull some nutrients from her body, but also help, but also be thin enough where that extra fat isn't causing any sort of hindrance on the calving itself, and hopefully lower those dystocia problems. Okay. Well, I know I'm standing between you guys. Oh, yes.
So they let us stay out on range quite a bit later this past
Mhm.
year. A lot of those cows ended up coming in at 3 or a low 4.
Mhm.
So how much TDN do you have to feed to get them to 5 or 6?
Okay, so a lot of the cows stayed out on pasture longer this year, so they came in a little bit thinner on that 3 to 4 body condition scale than a little bit higher. So how much extra energy do we need? So if we figure about 100 pounds of per body condition, let's say to even just get them to a 5, let's say we're going to a 4 to 5, so we need extra 100 pounds of body weight. That's what they consider adding that extra body condition. So her maintenance requirements at that time probably were between 11 and 12 pounds of energy just for her maintenance. So we would want to probably increase that to about 13 to 14 pounds of energy per day to add that extra body weight back onto them, get them to grow and add that extra body fat. So it would take, some of those higher priced, higher quality feeds to get her that boost of energy is kind of where I would start. I didn't mention it, but one of the best, easiest ways to assess body condition without having to run them through a chute, really feel them up, is when you're rolling out hay, you're feeding cake, whatever you're doing, is as you drive back by them, have a scrap piece of paper in the pickup. Every 5 or 10 head, look at them and go, okay, she's a 5, she's a 4. Average those head out. Okay, let's say it's an average of a 4.5, and a couple weeks later do the exact same thing. Doesn't have to be the exact same cows. Average it again, and if it goes up, then you're adding body condition into the herd. If it stays the same, okay, maybe we want to boost a little bit more of those high quality feeds in there, help them add a little body condition. And if it goes down, then obviously we need to add quite a bit more. But it's just one of those ways you can just kind of look and generally assess the herd. Another one, just so you kind of know, a 5, you'll see the last 2 ribs on the cows. There won't be a lot of extra fat on her anywhere, but those last 2 ribs are indicative of a 5. If you see more ribs than that, she's lower. If you see less ribs than that, she's a higher body condition. So just kind of a couple general rules there that are pretty easy to do while you're just out there feeding and making some assessments. I know we're going to break, but I will be here. So thank you, everybody.